again, how was y'all's day? Let's start there. Because it's important to check in with your fellow people, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty good day. Can't complain. Friday, start of a holiday weekend.
Okay.
So.
Okay. What about you?
Definitely can't complain. Could be better, could be worse, but but it was overall pretty good.
And what about you, Angelina?
It was a good day. I have a lot of things to plan as a creative for over the weekend. Work was busy. But overall it was a very good, very sunny day. So I'm very happy about that. Yes. So again, we are here to talk about burnout as creatives, right? And as a creative, I have so many questions. And so do like my fellow partners within the creative world. I myself am with, a little bit of depression. I've been diagnosed with it, and I have tips and tools as well as a therapist who helps me through that. But a lot of creatives don't. And so what are just some of the signs of like burnout before, a creative like hits that wall, do you think? Or any that you've experienced with a patient?
So there are all kinds of signs and symptoms associated with stress and burnout. And actually, something that you referenced in what you just said is one of them, which is that feeling of overwhelm, of being kind of overtaxed, drained, tapping into those feelings. Those are some of kind of the initial feelings that you might start to experience, or that might to start kind of to occur more frequently when you might be experiencing that. So that's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like what can happen is this general sense of kind of disconnect. It's like the things that you love or the things that you enjoy, it sort of gets drained of the joy that can become attached to it. And so that's probably one of the biggest signs is you find yourself attempting to do your work and it's just such it feels like such a drain to do it.
Speaking of doing your work, losing your motivation. So having diminished motivation or amotivation, so just absence of it altogether. That's pretty common as well too. Having increased frequency of procrastination or resistance in kind of starting tasks. That's another thing that you might experience or see. And isolation and withdrawal. That's something else too. Kind of distancing yourself, not just from your work, but from other people.
Oh, wow. I see. I think a lot of people don't realize that isolation is one of the signs. Because, as a creative, sometimes I have to get alone in order to get into my creative space and my creative bubble. But communion is very important. And I don't think that we realize that, when we're taking that time to ourselves, I just need some time. I just need a few days. Few days turns to a couple of weeks, and then you're missing birthdays. But you had every right intention, right? But we didn't know it was almost like self-sabotaging in a sense, right?
Right. And the reality is that stress and burnout are different in that stress, there's still engagement. Okay. Burnout, there's this absence of engagement or disengagement, which is what Dr. Neal was referring to. And so, with that, you kind of get lost in it sometimes, and it can very kind of quickly slip to the place of disengagement and burnout. And so it's hard to catch sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I think that the thing to also, and to be careful of, is that at a certain point, something's not burnout anymore. And then whether or not you're transitioning into depression. And so not just though you have this disconnect associated with the work that you do or the things that you enjoy, but then as it starts to spill out into the rest of your life, and then that becomes, something additionally to kind of look at.
So what are some ways that a creative or, other people can know, what's the difference between, I am just burnt out, there's just been a few low days, and actual diagnosed almost depression? What is the difference, or some things that we can look for in that?
So that's where it gets hard, because there can be some significant kind of overlap between the two. I guess with most things, you're going to think about persistence of symptoms, like how long those things kind of last. And I would say probably the thing where when you get to depression, there becomes a little bit more intensity when we're talking about your will to live, I guess, in some ways. Not only then disconnection from others, disconnection from your work, but then just a general sense of worthlessness, or not feeling connected to anything,
and hopelessness.
And hopelessness as well. And so I think there can certainly be some overlap. And some of it is that with persistent burnout, then getting to something more, but like burnout severe too, but to something that is like clinical depression.
Okay. So if we take it back to those of us, the creatives that are getting into that burnout, right? And it's about to happen, they can tell. What are some tools that you all think can help a creative? Because in my opinion, I might be biased, but creatives work just a little differently. Like sometimes we think that our greatest creations come from like the most negative places. And then there's this fine line of, do I dwell here so I can get it out? Or do I fight out of this and lose the potential creation of it, right? So what are some things that we can do so we don't actually become burnt out?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost is awareness of what stress versus burnout versus depression looks like, which is what we've been talking about. And we haven't hit on all the things, but some of the things. So to be able to kind of recognize and understand what that can look like, specifically for creative. But after the kind of that awareness is there, it's also crucial to kind of have somebody else share in that awareness with you that's in your life, that connection piece, particularly because we referred to how you can isolate and withdraw and kind of disengage. And when we get to that space, it's likely that, we're not in a space to be able to ask for help or seek from other people. So connection, awareness and connection are two things right off the bat that I would offer.
Okay.
And probably the other thing is, like, I guess a skill or tool is sometimes once you find yourself in a certain place, it may take a stepping back, not from like people or things, but sometimes to kind of regain perspective or reframe things. Because once you get, whether it's a creative or whether it's in some other kind of field, you can develop this kind of tunnel vision. Related to whether or not, like, I have to complete this thing, I have to do this thing. And that sometimes you just might need to take a step back and allow yourself to recharge, that where you remove yourself from the thing that you enjoy doing, you want to do it, but is, too much of anything can be kind of problematic.
Yeah, that is true.
And I have some examples of that, actually. So one of the ways in which I encourage people, particularly creatives that I work with, to kind of recharge is to quiet out the extra content in their lives.
Okay.
So here's what I mean by that. Creatives immerse themselves in content. That's their work, right? So what we then tend to do as an escape when we go home is watch TV, read books, look at TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, like you name it. And even in some cases, attend community functions, family functions. Like, that's a lot of interaction, a lot of stimuli. And sometimes we just need to stop taking in all of the information, because a creative's brain is wired to do something with that information. And so if we're constantly exposing ourselves to that stimuli, then we're going to feel the pressure to do something with it. And so maybe those aren't the best ways for creatives then to kind of recharge, instead doing something that's not content driven.
Right. So I want to take it back to where you were seeing the difference between stress, burnout, and depression. So my first question is, like, would that be considered like the order of stages in a sense, or just to be hyper aware of, like, those are the signs that maybe something should be some intervention should come in?
So many things in the behavioral health or mental health field are not linear, not completely linear.
That makes sense.
Just like most things aren't black and white either. They're pretty gray most of the time. So you could make that you could kind of see that parallel or that pattern, but it wouldn't be completely accurate either. Because it doesn't always move in that direction, and it can kind of bounce around, and it can look different for different people. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that stress, then burnout, then depression, but that could be a trajectory or a path for someone.
Okay. So as a creative, a lot of the ways that I relate to others are through examples, right? And so I really like the way you laid that out. So I know I have experienced all three of those things at some point as being a poet, on top of being a mom and a full-time, like, so many things, right? So stress for me kind of looks like I have 4 or 5 events in the week, and I'm overwhelmed with it, right? And I'm planning them out, but planning them out is making me anxious. I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get it done? But I execute and I'm extremely tired after, right? But then burnout looks like, okay, I have 4 or 5 events this week. I'm going to do it, but 3 of them I didn't do my absolute best. And then I probably forgot the lines or I forgot something at home. And then my depression looked like somebody reached out to me for the event and I declined. And not because I didn't have anything going on, but because I didn't want to be around anyone. Does that kind of like reflect those? So those are things I think that it's important for a creative to see and understand, because to some, they might say, oh, you're just overwhelmed, or, oh, no, you're overbooked. But it's like, no, I think I need to actually actively do something about the way that I'm feeling right now. And another thing that's important to me as a creative is changing the narrative away from that you can only create out of a negative place. Like your best creations come negatively. And I, have you all ever dealt with a creative maybe saying that or doing that? Like, what are some things that you've probably had as a response for that?
Yeah. So, ironically, in a session today, this came up. I saw someone who is a creative, and she was having trouble kind of finding that drive to complete some tasks and things that she had before her, some art projects. She does some graphic design. And so she, what we did is, and this is one of my favorite things to do, because creatives also tend to be pretty hard on themselves, pretty self-critical.
Very.
And so what we did is we engaged, because she has all of hers digitally, we engaged in a reflection of her past works. We went through them. We looked at them. I had her kind of sit with those feelings, reflect on where she was at in life when she created these projects. And then she was able to see the power of some of the works that didn't come from those dark places in her life, that came from other types of moments in her life that weren't birthed just solely from darkness. And that then as a result, like, her worth wasn't attached to that only time period in life.
That's really powerful. Like, I don't think sometimes we think about looking back at what we've done. We just keep thinking about what are we going to create next?
What next? What next? What next?
And then what happens when some of your most impactful work you remember comes from a negative place? But that's a really good exercise, I think, that a lot of us creatives can do to be reminded that we just don't create from there. We create from other places.
Right.
Because I would think that if I was to think that everything impactful and super heavy that I created came from something negative, I would be hesitant subconsciously of coming out of that negative place, right? So that's really powerful.
Yeah. There's all kinds of different things and creative exercises that you can kind of do. Another one is like a metacognition. So, journaling, reflection. A lot of times we don't reflect until we are in a negative space. But as someone that, as someone that is tapping into those creative energies that, is kind of constantly on in those areas, we can tend to not want to do things like journaling or things like that, because it kind of seems like an extension, but it's actually a really helpful and introspective way to, again, kind of look at where you've came, the growth that you've had, and what's worked and what's not worked for you over time. So engaging in self-reflection throughout the creative journey on an ongoing basis, even if it's just a couple bullets, even if it's just a couple of sentences there at the end of the night before you turn in, or in the morning when you're having your cup of coffee, there can be a lot of power in that self-reflection proactively and throughout the journey, rather than when it's become too much.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's this song or whatever, and it says that you got to hold on to what you believe in the dark. Like, remember what you saw in the light, so that even when it gets dark, you can still remember what it looks like. And I think in a way, that's like Chelsea was saying, people tend to journal when they're in a bad place. But it could be very beneficial to also journal your accomplishments, to journal the things that you did good, so that when you are in a dark place or you do want to look back, that you have that. Because you do get hard on yourself. And so you also need to have, when you hear the good voice,
like a reminder,
a reminder that, hey, I did this and I can accomplish this. And figuring out how to, when things do get dark, how do I get back there? Or even just the knowledge that you can be there. Because some people, once they get so far into burnout or depression, I think the thing becomes that this is going to be unrelenting. Like, this is not going to end. Yeah. And once that comes into play, that can be a very difficult place to get out of. So if you have your own, things that your words saying that I can do this, or this is what I've done and accomplished, is probably even more powerful than what someone else says to you, because we hear our own voices all the time.
Yeah, like she said, like, we're our own worst critics sometimes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess, like, talking about being our own worst critic, it kind of goes into, like, the self-sabotage of it, right? So, like, what are some aspects of self-sabotage?
Mm-hmm. So, comparison. That is the one that I want to emphasize. And if you think about it from the earliest elements of our exposure to creativity in the arts, elementary school, art classes, things of that nature, it's human for us to compare. So even in those earliest kind of creative moments, we're seeing what our peers do. We're hearing what people say about it. And this element of social comparison in the world of creativity begins. And so that becomes part of our narrative. And then, of course, there are other experiences in life that continue to shape that. And the reality is that everything that we produce is not going to be a masterpiece. Everything that we do is not going to be our best work, but it's human nature to compare what we do to other people. And when you get in the lane of social comparison, it's a really dangerous drive. Yeah. And that can definitely be something that puts you on that path to burnout.
Wow.
So here's the other thing. I know we talked about external comparison, but then even comparing yourself to yourself. Yeah. So like, this is what I was able to do when I was this age or when I was in this place, and I just can't seem to do that anymore. So rather than recognizing, okay, that person was that person, that creator were this creator. So now who am I now? And how do I want to go forward now? That person is me, but this is me also, and not to compare what you used to be able to do, because where you are now, you may be able to do something else going forward. Again, our own internal voices, our own comparisons, our own things are sometimes our worst drivers, some of the worst things that we can get caught up in.
Yeah. I would have never thought about that. Like, I sure I've done it. Like, oh, Angelina, like a few months ago, you didn't do that. Or no, you could have done that back then, but you're not thinking about it in the moment that you are self-sabotaging yourself, right? And you say, like, it's kind of almost like human nature because of what we've been conditioned to, right? But like, how do we fight against that sometimes?
So one of the healthier ways to kind of work towards your goals is just that, is to set goals. Smart, attainable, measurable goals that are realistic, for you to be able to work towards, rather than kind of looking to the sides and looking back in a negative way on your experiences. So honoring who you've been along the way, but setting a goal that is where you're wanting to head with these creative endeavors. So having a concrete goal or goals gives you purpose and direction, that kind of keeps you focused and not kind of all over the place, which can be really kind of when that overwhelm starts to consume you. Yeah. And ultimately, it propels us and gives us a motivation that a lack of direction or lack of focus often doesn't. So trying to, when we start projects or before we do, to go ahead and set a goal for a specific project, keep it really small, have kind of an overarching long-term, 3-year, 5-year kind of plan that has goals related to growth and development or experiences or opportunities, risks that you want to take versus driven on kind of like accomplishments. And those are the things that kind of keep you focused and intentional in your work and gives you something to work towards.
Very nice. And being intentional within that.
Yeah.
Was that like the SMART method?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay. I thought I picked up on it. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. And can you say what that is
again? It's smart, measurable, attainable,
realistic,
and time. Time driven.
Okay. Okay. That's actually, I think they use that like on multiple facets of life.
It is.
Honest. Yeah. Cause I think I've heard it at work. So, yeah.
It's used in all kinds of different things. So that's a good one.
Very nice. So a little bit about burnout, I think, is sometimes when we get what some call for writer's block, right? Or when any type of creative gets into a space where they don't have any type of inspiration, maybe lack of motivation, probably waiting for something to happen so they can create from it. Right. But if a painter can't paint, what else should they do? Or if a writer can't write, what else can they do to help them write or help them paint? And sometimes, I tell the creatives, like, if you're a writer and you are having writer's block and it's probably not really around burnout, but you just really can't find anything. Sometimes I tell them just to use a different medium. Yep. Maybe go paint. Yeah. So is that something that you sometimes tell people?
That's what I was going to suggest, actually, and make the distinction that the writer's block or the creative block is something that happens. It is different from burnout or otherwise. And it's something that everyone's going to experience at certain points in different kind of degrees of variability. But to kind of combat that, one of the things that I've seen be most effective in the people that I work with is exactly that. But doing it in a way that connects you to why you're creative in the first place. So tapping back into that why and separating and having a separate kind of time and space for the fun, because we're creative and that's a part of us and the fabric of who we are. But it then becomes our work. And so anything that becomes our work at a certain point is going to kind of lose the joy and all of those things that are kind of like what attracted us to be that in the first place. So to reconnect to your why, do something totally different, a different medium. Do something that is sharing it in a certain way to kind of get that recognition. Or I like to, I'm a family person. I have a 7-year-old. So getting your children or your family members kind of involved in what you do or a version of what you do in a fun way. So just mix it up, and connect to the fun and the original kind of thing that drew you to your craft.
Yeah, I like that. And I wouldn't, sometimes I forget that, sometimes it's just about just being around others, and I think sometimes the support, or not sometimes, most of the times the support is very helpful, right? But then as creatives, sometimes we don't feel like we really have the resources sometimes, or that, it's just a creative thing and I can get out of this by myself. But like removing that stigma and saying like, no, I think I'm hitting burnout, and like, where can I go and what can I do? Like what suggestions do you have for any of like, especially the local creatives, cause we're in my opinion, a creative melting pot, right? And right after COVID and the heightened conversation of mental health awareness, like what can a creative do to combat this? Because now we have recognized that it is a mental health thing, right? So what suggestions do you all have for that?
So one of the things that I want to recognize is the connection piece. So this is crucial. And the part that I want to recognize is that creatives are very entrepreneurial. They're not often in these big teams that there's kind of this already kind of contrived support that you might see in companies and organizations. So it naturally can be a more isolating field, right? Okay. And so it becomes then more on the creative to kind of create their community, stay connected to their community, and find spaces to receive that support. So I want to like recognize how creatives kind of already start a little bit in the hole. And the very thing that we've said in the beginning is one of the most important parts to kind of navigate this. So as we are a creative melting pot, we have plenty of people, some that are responsible for the space that we're in tonight, that are creating those spaces for creatives to come together, share their experiences, talk about them, and see that they're not alone, because that's so much of it, and create this sense of community that brings people together that share kind of the same experiences.
Yeah, we're social animals by design. Even the most introverted person can draw on the energy of other people. And so sometimes it's just being in the presence of a different type of energy, a different vibe to get out of where you currently are and reconnect with other stuff.
Very nice.
Angelina, we have a question from online from Earl, who is asking, how do you stay creative or create habits to stay creative?
Oh, that's a really good question. So how do you stay creative and create habits to stay creative? I I think that I do journal. I journal a lot. And I have been working on creating outside of negativity. That is one thing I've really been working on like the last quarter of the year, because a lot of my creations in my book and stuff came from such a negative place. Like I went through a divorce and things like that, and it was all negative. But then like after I started like healing and finding like my tribe, I found I wasn't writing as much because I was always creating from a negative space. And I never realized like, one, that limits myself. It limits myself for what I can create because I'm waiting for a negative experience in order to create. And what is that doing to my mental health, right? And then two, I'm also limiting myself on how I grow as an artist because I'm not taking as much time to create because I'm waiting on the negative and it's messing up my mental health. So I challenge myself, like anytime something big happens in my life or anytime like I just feel an emotion that shifts, even from sad to even happy, that I write about it. I keep a notebook on me at all times. And I also attend other events that have nothing to do with my craft, or if it has something to do with my craft, I'm in the room and not doing anything. Like I'm just attending. And that really helps me stay creative as well, because it's like, oh, wow, you're the bomb. I want to do something like that. And not comparing really, but just like, okay, like this is possible.
Inspiring.
So, very inspiring. Exactly. So yeah, that's kind of how I stay creative.
Going along with that, in terms of systems to put in place, the thing that we could emphasize there is if something's not working, don't keep doing that.
Yeah.
So if something's not helping kind of get things going again or help you tap back into creativity, we tend to kind of hang on to that and try to force it to work. And we get fearful of kind of abandoning a system that's not working for us. So mix it up, try something for a couple weeks. And if that system of keeping track of deadlines and things like that isn't working for you, do something different. And kind of be proactive in that. On the same thread though, once you've learned that something works for you, put energy into that.
Yeah.
Those systems on the front end of things are also what help kind of steer you away from some of the things that we're talking about today.
Oh, wow. That's really good. I like that because the systems, they work. The systems do work.
And when they don't, and that's okay.
Right. And like give yourself grace in that. Like I tried it, and it didn't work for me. And that's okay. And like what works for me probably won't work for them. What work for them probably will work for me. And that is okay too. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough grace because we're our own worst critic. And we think that we have to do something by a certain time period because others may have done it, as well. And in a way that's kind of almost like, what is it? Is that kind of like self-sabotage or imposter syndrome? Like what is the difference between those two, or is there a difference?
I would say that there is a difference.
Okay.
So imposter syndrome is really this feeling internally that you don't belong in a space, like you don't belong in a space. And so when you get there, you don't feel like you belong. And so it creates this kind of anxiety, this angst, and then again, kind of feeding into whatever negativity about the situation. Self-sabotage, is more along the lines of whether you are aware or not aware, you create a set of circumstances that end up fulfilling something that you believe to be true. So if you think like, I'm going to fail at this particular thing, then whether you are aware of it, you may do things or not do things that ultimately prove what you said to be true. And so that's where it can be an element of self-sabotage in that way.
Oh, wow. So the self-sabotage is more like self-driven or inflicting upon like what you have done so you can fulfill a negative thing and false thing about yourself.
Generally speaking, you believe a certain thing will occur.
Okay.
And then whether you're consciously aware of it or not, the steps you take end up sabotaging what it is that you're attempting to create.
And usually that comes from a place of hurt or trauma or adverse events. And the common form of kind of self-sabotage that we see come up is people kind of unconsciously or consciously kind of beating people to the chase of what they fear somebody else might believe about them or do to them. So that's kind of like a way that we see it play out often. But imposter syndrome, I don't know. I'm curious. Have you experienced that? I know I have.
I don't know, because that's why I wanted to know what the difference was. Because I didn't know if I had both one. I didn't know, I didn't know what it was. Like, I have always thought imposter syndrome was like when, like, in a sense, like, oh no, I don't belong here. Like, no, like, this isn't your space. Like, how did you get here? You didn't do enough work that they did to get here. Right. Things like that. So is that kind of
so? I'll my own little story. So,
okay, cool.
So when I applied to medical school, there was this girl I went to college with. Her name was Christina Neal. And my name is Christian Neal. And so when I got the saying that I would go to medical school, it was like, oh my God, this can't possibly be me. And even though like you do all of the work, you've done all of the things, you succeed just like everybody else, somewhere along the way, you always continue to think this is a mistake. Ultimately, this is going to catch up with me because I can't possibly be on this level of other people. And so you never quite feel like you belong in any space. And then I think the other thing that I think where I experienced that is, like there's like a handful of Black doctors, right? And so most of the spaces you're going to walk into are spaces in which nobody else looks like you. And I think a lot of people can, whether that's, women going into, typically male, fields or environments, or, people of color going into predominantly, white spaces, that it can create this sense of that, like, you don't belong there. And then the part is whether or not you start to internalize that you don't belong there.
So to answer your question, yes, I think I have, because there have been plenty of times where, like, if I had a show, or I had an opportunity to speak to a group of people and, after that, they're telling you did a great job, or I related to this or that, or, people say, oh, the GOAT, I say this to others too. But I'm like, oh no, I'm just here. Like,
right.
No, that's not. Yes. So I'm going to actively work on that.
Yeah.
How though? Like, do you just like talk to yourself better? Do you remind yourself?
One of the things is repetition.
Okay.
So, one of my examples of imposter syndrome happened more recently. Dr. Neal, you'll remember this one. He encouraged me to apply for my first national conference proposal. And I was like, no way. Like, I'm not at that point in my career. This space isn't for me. And he's like, you don't know till you try. Take the risk. What's the worst that can happen? You get told what you think. Okay, let's just see what happens. And so I applied and I got accepted. And we presented at a national conference on mental health in Las Vegas this summer. I don't think it was till it was over, however, and even then it still kind of was very surreal, that it kind of, that kind of felt like I'm actually doing this, like this is, and then also seeing other presentations too, and seeing like, oh, hey, wait, I got this. Like, I'm on that level. This is the space for me. So the exposure and repetition, and that's hard because that means that you've got to take a risk and you have to be vulnerable, but we can't grow and we can't, kind of target those negative thinking patterns and experiences without taking a risk and without putting ourselves out there. And that's very hard, particularly if we're talking about, different people and different experiences and different things that make taking those risks way harder.
Wow.
I have a question from Omni Chick. Says, my support system sometimes tries to talk me out of going full time with my creative business. This can create stress, doubt, and sadness. How do you overcome that?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
So that's a question that I think probably a lot of people have experienced with their support systems, because when you have family, friends in your lives that don't have that passion or that aren't wired in that way, it doesn't make sense to them, right? So they're going to seek to kind of understand like why this, you know,
like, why is this and that? And
right.
That? Yeah.
And then of course there's also, you know, negative stereotypes associated with this line of work about like, it's not profitable or, you know,
the struggling artist,
the starving artist. Exactly. And so we could go down the path, right, of always trying to defend ourselves and, prove ourselves to others.
Yeah.
That's kind of a slippery slope and it's one that you probably won't make a lot of gain on.
Yeah.
So the question was, how do you navigate that? What do you guys think?
So I'm not a full-time artist yet. It will happen. But I have had like part of my support system, like, why do you do so much? And why are you always so busy? Like, oh, you need to rest. And I do rest when needed. I have a good support system. Like, okay, Angelina, like you need to calm down. But one of the things is, you know, I am a manager at my job. So like I break things down and I go through like patterns. I'm like, what do you do with your free time? And we talk about it. And a lot of them they just sit. And I was like, and I just use that time to do something else. I have a goal that I need to reach. And I know that I need to do this in order to do that. And it may not happen. My dream may not happen next month or the month after, but if I don't do the work now, I'll never see that. Right. And then I grow a lot when I do like my poetry or when I'm having like conversations like this. And you make great connections with people and you get to know about people more, and humanism and who we are. And the more I explore the creative side, the more that I learn about myself. And that self-awareness is the best thing to ever have. So, you know, like you said, like their passion may not be the same as yours, and that's okay. I'm pretty sure they have a passion that they would spend just as much time on versus what you do. If, you know, you're a little hesitant about going full time, we all are. I think sometimes we're just hesitant about even switching jobs, you know, the type of world that we're in. But if you have a passion and you wake up every morning and you know if that day you just didn't do it, you wouldn't be the same, then you just do it.
And ultimately, we do tend to, again, another thing that's human nature, continue to seek to have our needs met in family and close support, some things that we grew up with. And in these types of situations, that might not always be the best place to get that support from. Hence kind of that creative community.
Exactly.
And the importance of also having that.
Yeah.
Other people who have shared experience can help, you know, can kind of help you figure out how to navigate that space because they have probably been in the same place that you've been in. And that can be helpful too.
And I think because, you know, we all want to go off of a narrative, right? So your support system may be your family, but they are a support system for a certain like space in your life. So maybe you need a creative space, right? The community to commune with, because they know how it feels. They know what's going on. They might have ways that you can do that full time. So, you know, figure out like, okay, this is my support system, but for what? Like everyone says, everyone has friends for certain things. It's almost like the same thing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. It's also good to have that balance though, too, that voice of reason. You know, as someone who has some creative endeavors myself, I can sometimes jump in a little too zealously. So to have people in your corner that are grounding, that will kind of be the hole pokers in these big grand plans that you have to bring you back down to earth, make sure you've kind of considered all of those things, but ultimately knowing that it's your destiny, your goals, you're in control of it. And just to take the data that's kind of presented to you from family, from friends, and from your creative corners, and just kind of sit on it, reflect on it, and then make the best decision for you and your family.
Those reflective journals sound like that would help.
That could be a way to tie that in.
That would be a good way to tie that in.
Jordan has a question. He's saying, if you don't have inspiration, what do you do?
Man, there's two sides to that. So sometimes, like for myself, I'm either hired to work, or hired to write something, or sometimes I'm just writing. Depending on what you do, just try. There have been times where I was hired to write a poem for an event and I didn't do it until the day before. But I tried it and I started and then it worked. And sometimes the inspiration can come from a lot of different things. Sometimes what I do is do something other than what I normally do, like paint or something. Sometimes I like candles or incense. Incense are my thing. It could be the smells around you. It could be your scenery. Sometimes you need to just take a walk. Sometimes you need to not talk to certain people one day. Be honest about that. Sometimes you need to filter the voices. And then if nothing else works, just start on the craft. Just do it. Just try if you're a writer, write about what's in front of you, right? If you play piano, try to play a song that you never learned before. If you play guitar or bass, like try to play to the washing machine or something. Like try to do something that you just haven't done that aligns with it. And you'll find your way. You will definitely find your way. But I have found that changing scenery has helped me a lot.
On the flip side to that, there can be great power too in doing things that are familiar to us. So those repetitious kind of behaviors and going back to those mastery concepts actually are soothing to our brains and our nervous systems. And if there is a block in terms of our creativity, it's likely that our nervous system's like a little frazzled, a little stressed, a little worked up, right? And so we want to bring that threshold back down. So a way that we do that is by engaging in things that are very known to us, very familiar to us. So I'll give you my example. It was probably around the age of, 9 or 10, third grade, somewhere in there. I used to watch this art show. I don't even know. I grew up in rural Virginia. I don't know if anybody else has ever seen this or heard of it, but it was called Pappy Drew It. And it was a very interesting little show. But I used to watch this show called Pappy Drew It because I love to draw. And I learned how to draw, like take letters and make them into different animals. And one of the ones that I loved was taking a G and making it into a fish. And so when I am struggling to kind of get started on a drawing or something of that nature, I will draw that G fish because it's something I know exactly how to do. It's a consistent product. And it also connects me to a time where drawing was joyous. And I did it for fun. And it wasn't so laborious and, kind of laden with this task component. So mastery skills, reverting back to previous works, doing things that are more brainless. There's power in that too.
Yeah. I like that. So creatives, I'm going to assume you're a creative.
We're both creative in some ways.
Yes.
In some ways.
The meat of it. Let's talk about it. Okay. So we're going to start with you.
Okay.
Yeah. Cause you thought we were going to go over there. No, we're going to go here.
Yeah.
Tell us how you're creative.
Okay. So, I guess it kind of depends. So there's a lot of different ways. I used to want to be a writer. That was my initial thing that I thought I was going to do. And so I think where that's kind of transitioned is in the work that I do as far as, being a psychiatrist. And so I think where I get creative in that sense is that what it is that I do, interacting with people, there's a kind of an art to it. There's a way that you have to learn to, one, disengage with yourself because by nature, I'm an introvert. So like talking to people is not my ideal thing, but to be able to dial into another person and to in a way, put your mind in their mind, takes a great deal of creativity because you have to find a place that's outside of yourself that may not come, natural to you. And so that to me is my greatest kind of creative thing. And I think the other thing is to be able, this is why psychiatry was the thing for me, is that you are hearing another person's story and then you take that story and then you put it, we're now in a computer, but it used to be on paper. And then the idea is that anyone else who reads that should be able to see what you saw in that moment. If you do it well, you can do that. If you don't, then it just kind of sucks. But generally speaking, I would say the creativity is how do I take someone's story and how do I tell it so that other people can understand it? And that takes a great deal of skill.
Yeah, and that's really cool though, because I'm sure that you have great skill in that, and you've always wanted to be a writer, right?
Yeah,
So
I think I have great skill.
Yes. Yeah. What about you?
So I am a dabbling creative.
Ooh.
So I get bored very easily. That is something that I'll admit about myself. As someone who is neurodivergent and like a lot of creatives also often are, that's pretty common to kind of lose interest in things relatively quickly. I don't know if anybody has kind of a creative closet like I do that has like where all the projects went to die. But I have that. And the laughs let me know that, yes, I'm not alone in that.
That's right. You have community.
Right. There is community. But I have to have a little bit of everything.
Okay.
And that keeps it interesting to me. So my first love was drawing, doodling. That became kind of like, a little pressure filled for me. That wasn't as enjoyable, but then I tapped into writing, photojournalism. I did that all throughout school, yearbook conferences, things like that, scrapbooking. I like aesthetics. So anything that I can kind of get my hands on that has to do with aesthetics is something that I'm willing to kind of tap into and enjoy. I also like kind of the orchestrating and organizing and event planning and things that then help me connect the community, because that's very important to me too. So, I'm president of the Junior League, and over the last 8 years, I've been able to do just that, to put on these events and give back to the community at the same time. So I'm creative in those ways. The best part, though, is I'm a therapist. And so I am a special type of therapist called a registered play therapist, an RPT. And so I have special training to be able to use all kinds of expressive mediums, not just play, but art, music, sand, etc., to be able to help children and other individuals kind of tap into their experiences and make sense of the worlds around them through creative medium.
Oh, wow.
So I get to tap into my kind of inner creative through my work with them, which is a joy that I didn't realize how much I would love.
Wow. So like a creative can use the being creative to help heal. And that's like art. That's art therapy, right? Okay. I like that. I've heard a little bit about it and how like much it has become such a conversation now, especially after the onset of COVID, right?
Right.
So if a creative wanted to have that kind of therapy, would that be something that they would ask for or something recommended?
So there are different types of therapists that have the qualifications and trainings to be able to do that. So the type of therapist that I am is a play therapist, which usually specializes with children, but I do use it with adults too. And so I have kind of training in all of the expressive arts areas. But there are people that are specifically art therapists, specifically music therapists, etc. So they're master's level clinical providers, and they've got these extra credentials and specialized training that helps you utilize those creative arts and elements to be able to work through things. The reality is that it's hard to be vulnerable and to work on hard things. But if we do that through these other outlets, then research has shown that we can work through them more effectively and efficiently. And so that would absolutely be something that I could recommend. The other thing, though, is that might not be the right space, right? You might not want to interlace therapy with, art therapy if you're an artist. That might not be fitting, but that would be something that you could talk with that therapist about to see if that's right for you.
Very interesting.
We are almost out of time. One last question is, what would you tell a younger version of yourself that was dealing with burnout?
Ooh, I don't know how much younger that was. No, just kidding. It's going to happen. It's on its way. But don't lose this moment right now, worrying about later. You have all the tools that you need to get there. so experienced right now and just slow down just a little bit?
Yeah, I think that would definitely be my thing, is be in the moment. I think we generally live our life for the next thing.
All the way over there.
And so, being present with yourself.
Yeah, I like that. But then something else stood out to me that you said earlier, and it was about the self-comparison to self. I think that's what I would say, is to not be judgmental to yourself, to give yourself that grace that you're learning, that you're growing, that you're evolving, and that tomorrow you're not going to be the person that you are today.
Yeah.
So to give yourself some breathing room to move towards that. The other part, though, is the basics. I want to make sure that we don't end today without the basics. Water, sleep, proper nutrition. Like that's, we don't give enough, emphasis to the very basics. But if those basic needs aren't met, we can't do higher level things like being creative.
And rest is not selfish.
It is not.
It is not selfish. That is when you recuperate. Not. So please, if you need to, rest.
Right.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that talk, Chelsea, Angelina, Dr. Neal. Great conversation. This will conclude today's Create Virginia. Look for us on September 7th, where we will be in the Madison House with Tabitha Abbott, and she will be giving us information on how artists can work with larger organizations. So that will be our next talk. Thank you so much for this conversation, and we look to see you next time.